Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, a Jerusalem psychotherapist. For this week's Torah and Psychology post for Parshas Sisa, we're going to see how we can lean on the Parsha and take out from the Parsha a message of strength and encouragement for what we're experiencing or what we're continuing to experience with the war in Iran. So we've been through another week of missiles, of the sirens running to the Miklat, and really after this week, we've experienced a range of emotions that are very difficult, that we can be struggling to deal with the panic, the fear, the traumatic symptoms, the feeling of being overwhelmed and hopelessness. But these emotions that we experience are completely normal and are expected and understandable when we're facing such a difficult situation. And these emotions that we're experiencing, it could be that we want to just try to ignore them or suppress them. Maybe we just don't know how to contain and how to hold these emotions. Sometimes there are emotions that you could say on face value, are negative and that make us feel so lost and hopeless. But what we need to try to understand is that all emotions are, are justified. All emotions are part of our emotional experience, are part of what we go through in our life. Sometimes there are happy, more positive experiences that seem naturally to fall into the category of emotions that we want and that we embrace and that we can hold in a pleasurable way. And sometimes there are emotions that we put into a category that are negative or overwhelming. And we don't want to have them. We don't want to hold these emotions, and we try to suppress them or push them away or to ignore them. But really what we want to do is try to understand how we are a kli, we are a vessel to hold all these emotions. But there is this natural, in a way, categorization that we classify which emotions are fitting and which emotions we deem acceptable and that we are able to hold, and ones that we are not and we try to reject. What we can take out from this parsha that we'll learn is that we can try to understand how we can, in a therapeutic way, turn ourselves and try to develop ourselves as a kli to hold all these emotions, the positive ones and the ones that are also difficult and are challenging. And especially this week, it's more likely and most likely that there have been emotions that we feel unable to hold, that we feel that we don't have a container to hold these emotions, and that they're too overwhelming. So what we see from this week's parsha is we continue to learn about the kelim in the Mishkan, and the pasuk describes that these kelim were so kadosh, they're so holy, they are kodesh hakadoshim, they are so holy that anything that comes into contact with them, anything that touches them, the material, the substance becomes holy in itself as well. There's this complementary relationship between the kedusha of the vessel, of the kli, and what goes inside of it that then becomes holy in itself as well. It also receives this status of being of kedusha. But Rashi explains that it depends what the item is. If the item is fitting to be put into the kli, into the vessel, it's something that is appropriate and is used for the service of the Mishkan. It's something which is roi, it's something which is fitting and suitable, then it receives the status of kedusha. But something which is not suitable, if it's some item, some substance, some animal that is not fitting, is not used for this avodah, then it does not receive the status of kedusha. So what we see here is this idea of containment, which in psychodynamic theory is this idea that the kli is something which sometimes there are emotions that a person finds too difficult to hold. It seems not fitting. They don't understand. They don't feel it's too overwhelming. They want to reject these emotions. They can't contain them, and therefore, through a psychodynamic process, in therapy, or whether it's a friend, a family, a therapist, another person can be that container, someone that can hold and process these emotions that an individual feels they are not. There are emotions that are negative, too overwhelming. They're not fitting. They don't seem to go into the vessel. Their own personal vessel is not able to contain these emotions. Therefore, somebody else can contain them for them, can process them, and return it to the person in a way that the emotion becomes it's almost transferred into something which is now more manageable, more understandable, more fitting, that a person can now then hold for themselves. So what the Pasuk is saying in terms of Kedusha is that in terms of the Avodah, there are things that are fitting or not fitting. And therefore this will determine, as Rashi says, whether the item will receive a status of Kedusha by entering into the Kli of the the Kli that is used in the Avodah of the Mishkan. But on a psychological, emotional perspective, we are the Kli. We are the Kli, and everything goes into our Kli. And there is this interpretation, emotional, personal interpretation of what is fitting and what is not fitting. But through a process of containment, through a process of therapeutically trying to understand and come to terms with all our emotions, both positive and negative, therefore even the negative will receive, we can say, a status of Kedusha. Even the negative, difficult emotions, if we are, through the help of a therapist or through friends and family and through self-awareness, our container, our own personal container, our own personal Kli, is able to hold all emotions, everything that goes inside of it, will receive a status of Kedusha, will receive a status of being manageable and something which can contain and is part of our emotional experience. And that is the message I think that we can take out from this week's Parsha. That although in the Avodah and the Kelim of the Mishkan there is this distinction between Roi and not Roi, something which is fitting and not fitting, and receiving Kedusha by going into the Kli, on emotional, psychological level, and especially through what we're experiencing through this war in Iran, all emotions go into our Kli. And ostensibly, there is this classification between fitting and not fitting, something which is positive, negative, acceptable, or not acceptable. But through therapeutic process, and what we need to do is give ourselves time to understand how to contain all our emotions, even the most overwhelming and difficult emotions that we are experiencing at the moment. They can all become something which receives the status of Kedusha, something that we can hold and understand and is part of our emotional experience. Have a good Shabbos and keep well.